Just a decade ago, people would have had fresh enough memories to recall what happened with the Atlanta Thrashers franchise and laughed at the notion of Georgia being a hockey state. But now, at nearly every level of the minors across the state of Georgia, rinks are filling up and teams are exploding in popularity. 6 of the most populous cities in the state of Georgia already have teams, and Atlanta is trying to claw for another team in the NHL once again. So I aim to answer the question, what exactly is happening here, and why and how has Georgia become a hockey state in its own right? We talk about that and more in the first ever episode of Peach State Puck. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, my fellow Georgians, and welcome to the first ever episode of Peach State Puck. It's a passion project of yours truly, and I know what many of you are thinking. Well, who the hell are you? I might be a familiar name, voice, or face to those of you who are Athens Rock Lobster fans. My name is Matteen Rad, and I'm the play-by-play broadcaster for Athens. So I've gotten to see a lot of what's happening in the state of Georgia for hockey. And it's something that I wanted to do a deeper dive on. You know, you see the President of the United States give, the State of the Union. I want to give what the state of hockey is here in the state of Georgia. Because I think so many people, especially non-Georgians, look at what happened with the Atlanta Thrashers years ago and say, Atlanta, Georgia can't handle or can't generate the interest or attendance for an NHL team. And I think when you take a look at what the teams in the minor leagues across Georgia are doing, I think that dispels a lot of that notion. Along with that, I think hockey in Georgia feels inherently different, and I wanted to do a deeper dive on why that is. The fans of the sport here in Georgia have a true love for the sport. And in this state, whether it be pro sports or college sports, you're not devoid of options on how to spend your time and money as a sports fan, whether it be baseball, basketball, football, even soccer over the past 10 years. These sports have become a force in Georgia. But hockey isn't something that's inherited here. While there may be people that were raised up north and then moved here, or their parents moved here from more of a hockey culture, so many of the people that I've talked to at Athens and Rock Lobster games and events have told me, we gave it a try, or we got tickets, or our friends invited us for our first game and we never left. We got hooked, we got addicted. And it's one of those sports that when it gets into your bloodstream, it just won't leave. I've definitely found that out in my own way. And talking about me and my relationship with hockey, you're probably wondering, why should I listen to this guy about what he has to say about the sport? Probably in our next episode, we'll talk about my relationship with the sport and how I grew to love hockey as a native Georgian. But while sports fans in Georgia have a ton of options, I do think that there is a way that these people express their fandom that is different from other hockey markets. And I call it the SEC identity of sports fandom. That is like the SEC conference, if you will. Southern sports culture didn't reject hockey, nor did it accept the culture around it at face value. They morphed that fandom and absorbed hockey to fit in their own identity. And when you say that out loud, that explains a ton of things about the rowdier atmospheres that we're seeing, the obsession with identity, I think is the best way to put it, and the discussions of who has the best town, this tailgating mentality. I knew how I felt about the sport as what felt like an outsider looking in, going to a Thrashers game every now and then from when I was a kid to when I was a teenager. And I think the cutoff, or where it got lost in translation, is that when you get people in the building, when you see how fast the game is, when they see that for my money, it's the best live sport that you can see in person, they're hooked. They can't go away. The Thrashers had an issue in the initial draw, and I think that plagued them. But some of the teams that are making names for themselves in the minors are showing what it's like to have sold out arenas, to have a team that fans can identify with. And I think they're also showing why we're ready to try for the highest level of hockey in Georgia again. We're going to talk about each of these teams and show why that is, starting with the FPHL and the Columbus River Dragons. Every time I made the whatever it was, 3-hour plus drive into Columbus, and you get to meander through the fans who have gotten there so early to be a part of the atmosphere, I'm reminded of how much I genuinely enjoy that arena, the Columbus Civic Center. In my time covering the FPHL over the past couple of seasons as a broadcaster for Athens, it was consistently one of my favorite rinks to go to, especially in the way that the people there take care of you. I feel like the River Dragons, whether it be the club itself or the fan base, they have such a great awareness of their identity, and so much of that comes from what the fans have dictated and have decided, and I think that's a beautiful thing. That's what you're looking for as a fan of a team and as someone who's supporting the team. I think even the people who are working internally for the River Dragons. I think right now when you talk about Columbus, it's happened again this past year. They've been trying to overcome this little hump that they've had over the past few years. In my time covering the Fed, they are such an incredibly streaky team, and I mean that in a positive way. They had 2 hugely positive win streaks this past season, and teams like that are the teams that are able to make runs and win championships, and it just hasn't happened since that Ignite Cup win. With that being said, I'm really intrigued about what the new landscape of the FPHL means for the Columbus River Dragons, with both the Athens Rock Lobsters and the PD Ice Cats leaving for the SPHL. Obviously, that changes things for Columbus. And then what does the FPHL in general look like next year with the California teams being added? Mid-South is already looking like a strong contender. They've just added Tyson Kirkby, and he looks already committed to coming into that team next year. But obviously, these changes change things for Columbus. I think they have a real chance to be the out-and-out second-best team in the FPHL behind Binghamton next year. And they're going to likely be jousting with Monroe for that position, top team in the Continental, if you will. We'll see how divisions all kind of align for next season. But I think with all these uncertainties ahead, that makes it really interesting and fun to be a fan of the FPHL in general right now, and more specifically, a fun time to be a fan of the Columbus River Dragons. I think the conversation has been there in the mind of some Columbus fans of these teams that are moving in this SPHL, and would it be the right move for us as well? I think Columbus, and this is in my personal opinion, I'm sure fans of Monroe and PD will disagree with me, and they're free to, but Monroe and PD were the other Southern powerhouses outside of Georgia in the Fed. But I think Columbus, more so than those teams, has the right kind of infrastructure to succeed in the SP. However, I'm not going to sit here and pretend to know Jeff Krupp, owner of the Columbus River Dragons. I'm not going to pretend to know his mind inside and out. But I do think he will feel like they've been close to the true victory that they've been searching for these years, that it potentially be more open than it has been in previous years coming up in the 2026-27 season. And, potentially there's a lot of unknowns because of these teams that are coming in, but I think it's going to be really difficult to match what Columbus has been building for years now. And I also think that Jeff Krupp will see that, look, they're drawing well. They can be a successful team without having to spend the uptick in money that it takes to just be a part of it, be a team in the SPHL. We'll also see if we see the return of the league's reigning MVP in the FPHL, Ty Barrow. It would be really big to get him back, especially after we just had the expansion draft And we saw that Alexander Jemayev, who is the all-time leader in goals for the River Dragons franchise, it does not appear as he'll be coming back. You never say never. Trades can happen, and things that are wonky in the Fed happen all the time. But with that being said, he is a big absence, but they're the only team that I've seen in the FPHL right now that are already announcing rookie additions to the roster. And there's some exciting additions in who they're bringing to the roster. So definitely keep an eye for the Columbus River Dragons, especially on the broadcast side. A big congratulations to my friend Devin Dobek. It looks like you're going to finally win some games this year as a broadcaster, my man. With the first year that I met him as a broadcaster for the team that was in Danville 2 seasons ago, and then his time with Biloxi last year, Devin hasn't been the luckiest guy in terms of seeing wins, but that's definitely going to change as he moves to a really fantastic franchise in the Columbus River Dragons. And part of what I wanted to do is also talk about what this team and what each team that we'll be discussing represents in terms of, again, what was the point of our episode here? The state of hockey in the state of Georgia. I think Columbus, they bring stability. I think they bring tradition. They've shown success in their league, and also an established fan base, a fan base who are a bunch of diehards, and that's a common thread that we'll see across these minor league teams here in the state of Georgia. In my preparation for this show, I wanted to do a deep dive of all the teams that we'll be talking about throughout the podcast, and in my research, I was unsure on how to talk about the Macon Mayhem in the SPHL. I think a lot of what I knew about Macon was from the outside, and a lot of it was doom and gloom. But I think a lot of it was also probably coming from people who didn't have enough insider knowledge to really make a comment. And I think in doing my research, I'm very glad that I did. It shows that this team is a team that is on the mend and is on the up and up. The Mayhem are a team that has a championship to its name. However, since losing in the President's Cup finals to Pensacola back in 2021 and winning the Coffee Trophy that year as well, which was a season where only 5 teams participated due to COVID. There had been 4 straight years of not making the playoffs, but that ended this past season when the Mayhem made it into the last playoff spot in what was, if you were paying attention to the SPHL, an incredibly tight table all season long. Unfortunately, as the number 8 team in the league, they had to go up against the Coffee Cup winners in the Peoria Rivermen and weren't able to secure their first playoff win in 5 years. Interestingly enough, head coach Dave Shinichny lost to the Mayhem in the President's Cup final as a member of the Rivermen back in 2017. This year, he ultimately fell in 2 games to his former head coach, Jean-Guy Trudel. But that didn't mean that there wasn't still marked improvement off the ice as well. The Mayhem season average attendance of 2,373 was their highest since the 2017-18 season and second highest all time. And that's, all well and good. I didn't just want to cover the cosmetic level of what was going on with these teams, their record, the attendance. You can get that kind of stuff from Wikipedia. I wanted to see what makes these fan bases and the feel around these communities different. In order to do so, I reached out to Macon fan Donald Cleaton. I knew how big of a Mayhem fan he was just from his profile picture because it's the Mayhem logo. And I wanted to ask him about what separates Macon from the bunch. And a lot of what he says about the Mayhem are also parts of central themes that I've ran into with all of these teams. One of Donald's most interesting observations is when Macon fans create a great atmosphere, they're not simply cheering for goals. They're in essence trying to prove that hockey can succeed in a place where many outsiders may assume that it doesn't belong. The crowd itself, becomes a statement in that regard. Donald's comments also strongly support my theory that Southern hockey fans behave more like SEC fans than traditional hockey fans. The common threads in that include community pride, identity, belonging, civic ownership. That was something specifically that Donald said was that this it feels like a civic duty to try and keep hockey in this community. And I think that shows just how different the feel around hockey is in these communities. The culture feels familiar to those who might support or watch teams outside the sport of hockey. One of the many things that I wanted to do over the coming weeks is explore just how much the landscape of hockey in Macon has changed over the years. The history of hockey in Macon is nearly as old as the history of hockey in Georgia itself. Back in the early 70s, the Macon Whoopee, named after the Doris Day song, had its own meteoric rise and fall, which it's crazy to me to see any sports team. Who has the cojones these days to name a sports team after a song that is about doing the dirty? I love it. I'm trying to think of one now, but what would be the modern equivalent, if you will? Leave it in the comments of what would be the modern equivalent of the Macon Whoopee these days. And this was a team that was talked about on Johnny Carson. Richard Nixon had a Macon Whoopee shirt. But eventually they had to fold due to poor attendance. Hockey has nearly flatlined in Macon multiple times, but there is a pulse that's been kept alive due to the CPR that's been applied by some dedicated fans. I think this team represents persistence, community ownership, and choosing hockey even when it may not always be the easy thing to do. I'll be doing a deeper dive into Macon as this show goes on. Obviously, I'll be seeing them more upfront and personal in Athens Rock Lobsters Macon Mayhem games, as I'll see those games up close. But I also went to eBay and got a book here, Once Upon a Whoopee, that was written by Macon sports journalist Ed Grissamore. And maybe we'll try and get some guests on the show, that episode as well, to talk about not just the state of hockey right now in Macon, but also the roots of hockey. And it'll be interesting to see how they cope and how they will enjoy a new in-state rivalry this upcoming year as they welcome the next team that we'll be discussing in this episode, and that's the Athens Rock Lobsters. All right, I know what you're all thinking. It's time for the big boy to talk about his team, and he's going to be completely objective about it, I'm sure. Look, I've had the unique opportunity to be able to see firsthand what makes Athens different. I think there's a different expectation from the fans in the Classic City community. The argument could be made that Athens is the most elite sports town in Georgia, especially with the way that, Atlanta teams have struggled. I'm an Atlanta sports fan too. I'm not trying to dog on them, but outside of the Braves, it's a tough watch a lot of the time. But I'm also not going to try and sit here to generalize Athens residents to just a collection of UGA fans. Believe me, that's gotten me in trouble before, and I know there's already Rock Lobster fans who would want to get their hands on me for saying that. But, many of these fans, again, they share the same, SEC fan mentality that I've talked about. It's civic, it's about identity, but it does feel like with Athens, there's an expectation to have an elite product, whether it be on the ice or off the ice. And when we talked earlier in the show about, there's so many different places that you can spend your minute and your dollar in Athens, whether it's going to watch UGA basketball, UGA football, baseball, volleyball, et cetera, et cetera. We can go on and on. For these teams that come to these games, enjoy the sport of hockey, it's civic, it's about identity. And I think the desire from the Athens front office and the ownership to fulfill that expectation that's had, especially at the on-ice level, has led to consistent sellouts in the first 2 years of play. There's already so much news, it feels like, about the club in the offseason. We've already seen the SPHL protected list as they've made the move from the Fed to the SB, the coaching move from Garrett Rutledge to Scott Burt, and there'll be a little bit of fun in that, as well as they'll go up against their former head coach, That'll be the first time that they do that in franchise history, as Gary Rutledge was recently the new hire for Fayetteville in the SB. But like what we talked about with Columbus, one team staying and one team leaving, there's still so many uncertainties for the Rock Lobsters right now, but the likes of which I think are really exciting. Perhaps the biggest uncertainties are what the roster will look like. We have seen the protected list, and I don't think any of the names that have been included are big surprises. You've got your veteran leaders, your rookies who had good seasons last year, but still, because of the nature of these two leagues in the FPHL and the SPHL, I just don't think those rosters or those protections could be set in stone. That's just the nature of it. But in their 2 years in the FPHL, I think along with the Binghamton Black Bears, Athens was able to be a bit of a standard setter in the Fed, especially when it came to the rank and, in my opinion, club identity and branding. There is maybe only one other team in Georgia that I think competes with Athens on that level. We'll talk about them later. While it might, may be more difficult for the team to stand out from the crowd in the SPHL in comparison to the Fed, I think there's no doubt that they're going to keep looking to improve in every area. This is a team that represents momentum, the SEC identity at its highest level, and elite top-level experience. As you know, I get a front row look to Athens in the franchise more than almost anyone else. And so there'll be plenty more about Athens over the coming weeks, but I'll keep it as base level at that for now, because there's going to be plenty of more on Athens coming up after this. I want to briefly touch on the newest team to talk about on this list, a team so new they haven't even played a game yet. The Augusta franchise that will open up play in the ECHL in the 2027-28 season had a public event within the past couple of weeks where they announced their new team name, and they chose a name that's already familiar on the river with the Lynx. I'm not talking about URL links, hyperlinks. I'm talking about like the cat, the feline, LYNX. I think the excitement around the team at that event shows that there likely is to be a big difference from the last time the Lynx were around, as the Lynx became the first ever ECHL team in existence to cease operations in the middle of the season. And that was nearly 20 years ago now, back in 2008. We're going to talk about the rest of the ECHL franchises here in the Peach State as well. But how about this? When Augusta joins in 2027, Georgia will join Florida as the only other state that has 3 franchises in the coast. A city that hasn't had hockey in almost 20 years, just packed out a reveal event for a team that doesn't even start playing until 2027. In that, it shows just how much there is room for expansion. There's a huge amount of optimism and future growth and excitement for where hockey is in the state of Georgia, but also in the city of Augusta, the second biggest metroplex in the state of Georgia. The city of Gwinnett, I know that they're the Atlanta Gladiators, but while the hockey history might be deeper in Macon as a whole, the history of the Gladiators in general is longer than the Mayhem. And taking a look at both teams in my research, I think it was easy to see some parallels in the step-ups that the Glads made this year. I think the big difference is that the valley between the expectation and what happened this past season was maybe even more vast for the Gladiators. There's former Gladiator goaltender Matt Ginn, who had a tremendous first season as a head coach in the States. He was an assistant for the Glads before that, actually was a head coach in the EIHL in England with the Manchester Storm. Look, this is a team that has made the playoffs just twice in the last 11 years, but they were able to make it to the postseason for the first time in 4 years after the Glads won 44 games, and that is their most since the 2007-2008 season. Again, a great season of growth for the culture of hockey in Georgia as well. The average attendance of 4,760 was the highest that the Gas South Arena has seen in 10 years. This was a team that probably wasn't given a lot of chance or expectation coming into this past season, and it really felt like they flipped the script a bit this season and maybe helped shape expectations for a difference in the seasons to come. Ultimately, what was also a common theme among the Georgia teams in the pros this season, unfortunately, playoffs didn't pan out the way they wanted them to, with a series loss in the first round against the South Carolina Stingrays. But again, the stats are showing growth across the board in these teams. Right now, they have the most consistent, longest legacy in the Georgia hockey market. And the option to choose the Glads has been there for 20 plus years. But even with that being the case, people are making that choice for the first time in a long time when you take a look at the way that the statistics and their attendance have upticked in this past season. We've got only one more pro team to talk about, and let me cut right to the chase. I'm extremely excited with what the Savannah Ghost Pirates have done in just their first 4 years of existence. A lot of times with these expansion teams that get added, you see the high attendance in the first year, and then maybe it kind of trickles off. They've just had an average attendance of 7,485, which perfectly replicates what they accomplished the season before. Exact same average attendance. But what excites me about the Savannah Ghost Pirates, I love talking about this, isn't just about what they're doing on the ice or what they're building on the ice or the fans that they're drawing. They are doing something that really no other Georgia team is doing and very few teams are doing in the minors. They aren't just operating an ECHL team, but they're building a hockey ecosystem in Savannah. Let's talk about how they're doing that. Later this year, they will complete the project of the Savannah Ice Cove, which will be complete in Port Wentworth, right outside Savannah. It will serve primarily as the practice home of the team, of their ECHL squad, but it'll also be the home of the player pathway in Savannah. Kids are going to be able to use the Ice Cove to learn how to skate and then learn how to play, and they will run their own youth hockey league out of the Ice Cove. Now, when we're talking about growing hockey in Georgia, we often jump straight to the potential NHL expansion in Atlanta or the newest, shiny team. But, is there an argument that no organization has done more to try and introduce new people to hockey over the last few years than the Savannah Ghost Pirates? I don't want to get too ahead of myself because the Ice Cove isn't open yet, but really exciting things that are being planned by the Ghost Pirates franchise. I think hockey, like any sport, succeeds in Georgia when it becomes part of local identity. And Savannah is trying to get on the ground level of that and trying to be the reason that kids might grow up and play hockey. We'll talk a little bit more about, kind of what our central thesis is in this episode, but a lot of it has been built around hockey being chosen here in the Peach State. I think Savannah's trying to make a change to that. Savannah's trying to quite literally change the genetics around hockey culture in their community. And I'm really excited to see what that means 5, 10, even 20 years from now. Yeah, as I was putting together this episode, this podcast, which I think will be kind of my love letter to both hockey and this state, two things that I've held so close to my heart for, at least probably 15 years now. For the state of Georgia, longer than that. But as I was putting together this episode, I started asking myself what each of these teams really represents. Columbus represents stability. Macon represents persistence. Like we said, picking hockey when even it might not be the easiest thing to do. Athens represents momentum and building on that momentum. Augusta representing optimism with their franchise that is coming in the coast, not this upcoming season, but the next. Atlanta, Gwinnett, the Gladiators represents growth. And then Savannah represents outreach and expansion. When you put all of these things together, it's of true hockey culture. The collection of these hockey teams, they each have their own identity, but I think you take a look at all of the bigger picture as a whole, you see just how strong the culture of hockey has gone in the state of Georgia in what feels like such a quick period of time. I reflect back on my conversation with Donald Clayton, our Mayhem fan from earlier on in the Macon segment, and how he talked about how Macon fans aren't just cheering for their team, but to prove that hockey belongs. And the more I looked at all of these teams, the more I thought of my own conversations with fans around Georgia and fans at Athens Ford Arena of the Athens Rock Lobsters. Sometimes even fans of other teams who might catch our broadcast will reach out and we'll have a quick conversation. But the more I realized that the sentiment that Donald was sharing is a common thread through all of these fan bases. Look, there's still a lot of maybes. Maybe Atlanta gets another NHL team. Maybe Columbus wins a championship. Maybe Athens conquers the ESPY in their first year. Maybe Augusta becomes an ECHL success story. Maybe Macon continues their climb back up. Maybe all of these things happen. Maybe none of them do. But after spending the last few weeks diving into hockey around this state, I think I've reached one conclusion. And that is that the question isn't whether hockey belongs in Georgia anymore. Because the fans answered that question years ago. And they continue to answer it every game day, whether it be in Athens, Macon, Columbus, coming up in Augusta, Gwinnett. The real question now is just how far can hockey go? And that's a question that we'll keep exploring here on every episode of Peach State Puck. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe here on the YouTube side. And if you're watching on audio, make sure you keep your eyes peeled for the next episode. Can't wait to see you.